Welcome to the Ridgecrest podcast. This is where we take time each week for a deeper look into the previous Sunday's sermon. My name is Matt. I'm the Executive and Discipleship Pastor here at Ridgecrest. And as always, I'm joined with Michael Estes, our Senior Pastor.
Good to see you today.
Good to see you. Did you have a good weekend?
It was good, yeah. The weather turned out pretty good overall, and got to experience some baseball both on TV and in person, which is always fun for me and for our family. And so, what about you?
Yeah, it was good. Busy week. Kind of did some house cleaning and that sort of thing. And I guess it was maybe Saturday night. I got to go flying, so I took a trip down to Hattiesburg and back.
Nice.
And so that was really cool. And something I learned about Hattiesburg, and someone might be able to clarify this. Whenever I was flying down there, it's called a regional airport, which typically means it's a towered field because local airliners and stuff will fly into there. But as I was looking at it, it's not, and so it's a non-towered field. So, which is fine. So I just assumed that it kind of is a retired, it's not really a regional airport anymore. So we flew down. It was not, landed, real nice place. Notice they had terminals, it was neat. Landed, took off, and as we were leaving out and heading back this way, we hear Houston Centers, who we were talking to, give clearance for a regional commercial airline. I don't know exactly what airline it was. I think their call sign was maybe Blue something. I can't remember what that was, but gave them clearance to switch over to that field's radio, which is non-towered, to land. And so apparently this airport does still do some type of at least short regional kind of commercial flights, but it's a non-towered airport, which blew my mind because I would think that if you're a commercial airline flying passengers, you would think there would be some kind of FAA regulation that requires them to only fly into towered
That would make sense.
fields.
Those are large planes.
Unless the event of emergency, because at least a tower or you have a radar room who's really monitoring traffic and navigating people around and moving them around and stuff. But apparently not. Apparently, that's one of the few places.
I wonder if it was like an emergency type. I guess you would know if it was an emergency type situation.
No, it wasn't. And so I'm going to do some more research, but I thought it was very interesting. To see that, and because like I said, I've never seen that before. Any place I've ever flown where you actually have a regional airline flying into it's at a towered field. So
I don't know much. Everything I've learned about air travel has come from you, basically. By the way, this is the Ridgecrest podcast where we talk about air travel and learn.
We learn all sorts of things on the Ridgecrest podcast.
We really do. Y'all missed a really engaging conversation just a few minutes ago about Marvel and about movies and that sort of thing. But anyways, don't want to reveal too much about that. There may be a day for that.
That's right. Could be.
Have a whole new podcast.
We very well could.
The Ridgecrest Marvel podcast.
That's right.
I think we could probably make a really good one.
I think so.
Maybe even better than this.
Very, very possible. I think we'd do much better, pretending to be experts in a field,
absolutely,
that we really have no idea about, but we could talk a lot about that, rather than doing a podcast on a field where we technically are experts and we
allegedly
do that, kind of mediocre and. But
do better than mediocre for the rest of this, I promise.
Well, we have a good time. But you're talking about flying. Everything you learned has come from me.
Yeah, and
being a resident expert, which once again isn't a whole lot of information.
Yeah, all I do is get on planes and get off of them. That's my plan every single time I get on it.
Which is a success.
Yes.
I mean that's a good thing to
absolutely
get on the plane and get off the plane. Yeah.
So
in one piece. So So to land this plane,
because we need to.
Let's talk about Sabbath.
All right.
Where you are
the
resident
rest
expert,
on that plane,
and we can. So this is week 2 of our 6-week journey together of really, as we kind of talked about last week, processing it and really understand Sabbath, not in the aspect of how do I practice or what should I do or necessarily a lot of that. We'll get into a little bit of that, but the main point of it is really to know how to be in the Sabbath and really rest, in that. So with that being said, this kind of first question I think helps set the stage on that a little bit, and the question is, what is the difference between remembering the Sabbath as the command is here versus practicing the Sabbath, which I think you might get into a little bit next week,
We'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
A little bit. Again, I'll reiterate what I've said so far both Sundays as we've looked at the Sabbath is the idea that I'm not going to major on how to Sabbath. There are some things that I could probably share as far as the how-to part, but spend time around a small child and you begin to, like this weekend, I had the experience of being around a very young child, and he was with us at the baseball field. Well, if you've ever spent much time at a baseball field and watched a baseball game, you understand that it's a very technical game and requires a lot of knowledge to understand what is happening on the field. And you wouldn't think so, but as you start to try to explain it to a 4-year-old, the question that I got most often was, why? And
I'm 30-something, and I ask the same thing about baseball.
and there are times when I have really good answers to that, and there are
Yeah.
other times where I'm like, I really don't know. That's just a rule that somebody came up with.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably something that we need to think about when it comes to Sabbath, for example. Like, it's important, it's way more important for us to understand the why behind Sabbath than the how-to, because what happens is the how-to is the easier part, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's the part where I can like look at the situation and begin to like put together my to-do list when we're not supposed to be doing anything and start checking things off. Like, okay, I did this. I had my time of. I was listening to a sermon by Tim Keller, and he talked about kind of this how-to part of Sabbath a little bit. And one of the things he talked about is like there were 3 specific things that he was like you should practice on the Sabbath, and one of those things was like doing restorative work. Jesus talks about this when he's like, the Sabbath. It's okay to do good on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that more in a couple of weeks. Oh gosh, I'm butchering this word. Contemplation type of things, like you're contemplative. That's the word I was trying to say. Activities where you're spending time thinking about God and who He is and that sort of thing. And then he talked about the absence of doing anything. So like that space that's kind of free, open space that you don't have anything to do. And as he talked through that list, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I can do that, and I can do that, and I can do that, because it was the how-to part. And that's what happens with Sabbath as we move forward from the commandments. So we begin to find, well, there's some detail that Moses gives, but after Moses, what happens is the Sabbath becomes this thing where like there are all these very specific rules that are attached to Sabbath. Like, for example, I did some reading today, and there is in some Orthodox circles of Judaism the rule that you can't tie a knot, but you can, if you're a lady, tie a knot in your girdle, and if you can't tie a knot on a rope, you can't lower a bucket down to get water, but you could tie the bucket to your girdle and lower the girdle down and get the water. So like, what happens when we start to get the how-to part is we begin to create loopholes that we can slide our way through, and I think that's probably why we like to focus on the practicing Sabbath more than the actual remembering or the why of Sabbath. But if we have a very good grounding in the why of Sabbath, then the practicing of Sabbath becomes easier. We understand that the practicing is, the way somebody put it is, it's not a legislative thing. It's not a law that God has put on us where He is trying to keep us from doing things, but it is His love poured out for us that He wants us to enjoy this thing that He's giving us, and it's not supposed to be this burdensome thing.
That's good, and I think that aspect of remembering is important because, of course, we have pretty large staff here at the church.
Yep.
And there are several of our staff members who would work and work and work and work and kind of drive themselves to the point of exhaustion. They'd work every hour, every minute of the week, if they could, and and kind of feel like they're obligated to at times. And I think that's where this piece of remembering Sabbath comes in, is to recognize that we don't have to do that, and having that freedom of knowing that there are certain things that we've got to be okay letting go, or maybe letting go to the next week, or letting go altogether, or whatever it might be. But there's a healthy place, and we'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment, of separating that period of work or different tasks that we feel as though need to be accomplished versus what are some things that really need to be accomplished, or what are some things that I can trust that God's going to provide me the opportunity to do that later. So kind of building on that, you used the Hebrew word for work that shows up in this particular passage, and my Hebrew is extremely rusty, and this word actually has one of the hacking sounds in it. So
Yeah, we're not going to try that.
I'm not gonna
Spit all over the microphone. We'll have to clean it up. Steve, don't have to come over
yeah,
here
that's
and
right.
fix
We'll
it.
have to sanitize and do all that sort of stuff as we start spewing air droplets everywhere. But the word, really is that kind of working for labor, as you explained that. So then at the beginning of the sermon, we talked about this idea of how sometimes we can fill our schedules with all sorts of other good things that can in turn kind of become work,
Yes.
in a sense. So the question is how can those things that are kind of outside, when we think of our normal work, kind of 9 to 5, or we have an occupation. That was kind of what we did last week in staff meeting, was really talk through, well, what is work?
Yeah.
And for the simplest form is those jobs we're doing to earn money.
Yes.
Is the most simplest.
Provide for our survival.
To provide for our survival, yeah. So anything outside of that, how can those things that are outside of that working that we're doing to provide for survival, how can those things become the same type of work?
Yeah. So again, I'll reference the Keller sermon that I was listening to. The definition that he gave for things that become labor or work are things that have to do with answering the question, am I enough? And so is my work good enough? Is the thing that I'm doing good enough? Am I good enough? And anything that leads us in that direction and pushes us to the thing that I'm doing right now is an answer to the question, am I enough? Am I good enough? Is what I am enough for me to be satisfied and to be able to look at it and say, this is good? And anything that falls outside of that as far as activity, I'm not trying to prove my worth. Then ultimately that can be work that is restorative and good, and it's not work that is ultimately to prove myself. And so I think anything that, like these hobbies, I think about our area loves youth sports. If those things become for a parent, well, this is my way of proving, look at what my son or my daughter can do. I'm good enough because of them.
Yeah.
Or the kid, which is an outgrowth of sometimes what the parent has said, even if they haven't said it out loud, their actions toward it and the things that they kind of put into it. The child becomes, this is who I am, and is this good enough? And so when they participate in that activity, it becomes this thing of, I'm trying to prove myself, my worth, my ability, those sorts of things. And so I think that's how those things become the kind of work that is for survival, that is for producing something, that is for the sweat, getting by the sweat of our brow kind of thing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things can become that. Like, I mean, you enjoy flying. Mm-hmm. That could easily become, if you're not careful, a place where you're like, see, I am worthy. Mm-hmm. I am worth your time and attention and your respect, that sort of thing.
And which is common for pilots, to be honest.
I'm kind of grateful that pilots are good at what they do.
Yeah. But you can buy a T-shirt. Pilots looking down on people since 1903.
That's a pretty great T-shirt.
But
I mean, like it's easy for the things that are really good things. Like in reality, I think youth sports are a good thing in so many ways, but they can be perverted into sinful things so easily if we're not careful. And it's a battle that we fight. That's a battle that I know a lot of our families here fight, and there's a balance to be struck and an understanding that like those things can't be ultimate things, and that's just a hard thing to. Sometimes it means that you're going to look different than the rest of the people around you in some of the decisions that you make.
Yeah, that's good. And I think something that just I was kind of thinking there in process there along those lines is, a lot of times we think of the stuff we're doing in, whether it be sporting events, extracurriculars, whatever it might be, that can kind of become work. But I'm also thinking just like personality-wise, you think about myself, I'm a little bit more of an introvert. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I'm having to be in positions where I'm having to be more extroverted, that exerts a lot of energy, and I have to work really hard and do that, and I'm exhausted by the end of that,
Yeah.
and so I need some time, so if I'm taking a Sabbath, that Sabbath is usually going to be involved where it's just me and Whitney and Maverick. If I'm lucky, maybe just me. But like I've got to have this time where I can really just decompress and not feel like I have to entertain or
Yeah.
whatever anyone else. Like I just want that time for myself, and that's just a personality thing. And there are some flip sides of that where an extrovert, they're energized in those periods of time. So in those moments when they're alone, that feels like work. And so understanding that, they still need that opportunity, to be that. And there's just so much, the psychological aspect of it, physical. And I think too often we just restrict Sabbath to being physical,
Yeah.
but really there's so much more to it than that. And, you talked about that a little bit in the past couple of sermons and, as far as that goes.
Well, and a hint that I'm going to move way past physical to the spiritual very soon, because I ultimately believe that Paul gives us an interpretive key when it comes to understanding the Sabbath, that it was a shadow of things to come, and that it's good, but it's pointing to a greater reality that we need to understand, and ultimately the last week of the series will hopefully pull the curtain up on that reality.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things you kind of talked about in the sermon was this idea. I think any time we are working or trying to achieve or earn an income or things like that, maybe we're in positions of leadership or whatever, it is very easy to look at other people as a resource or a personal convenience. That's just extremely easy to do because we're looking at that bottom dollar. I can use this person who's gifted here, or skilled here, skilled here. I'm going to work them until I can earn money or whatever it might be, and just I think the temptation is very easy to be had there, where we start looking at people as resources or personal conveniences. So, question is, what are maybe some warning signs where maybe someone's in that position of leadership, or that maybe they own their own business, maybe it has nothing to do with like specifically work, could be a sporting team or whatever.
Yeah.
What are maybe some warning signs that someone can start recognizing? Oh, I realize that I'm looking at people as a resource or personal convenience more so than really remembering that they exist for a much greater purpose than that, as you mentioned in the sermon.
Yeah. So I do think that's one of the things that Sabbath really helps us with, that Moses outlining that it's not just for me, it's for us, it's for all of us. It's going to become even clearer in Deuteronomy 5 when we look at that version of the commandment. But I think some of the things that you can look at, so the moment that the relationship that you have becomes inconvenient for you, how do you react to that person? Is it I'm going to remove this person from my life at this point? Am I going to do I react in anger to the fact that they have failed in this way, or we all go to restaurants. It's not hard for us to look at the wait staff as they're there to serve me, right? And that is, a huge part of being a waiter or waitress, is it's a service industry job. But if my interactions with them are solely based on how good or bad their service is, and I allow myself to say things and think things about them that I would never say about them if we were meeting at church. If I met them for the very first time at church, then I have seen them as a commodity and not as a human being. And they may have failed from that commodity standpoint, but that doesn't mean that they're not worth me giving them dignity and value. That doesn't mean that we should be just like shrugging our shoulders at people being good or bad at their jobs. Doesn't mean that. But what it means is, if my concern for them, whether they do their job well or not, is solely because it affected me poorly in a bad way, then I probably don't care very much about them as a human being. I care about how they do their job, how it affects me. Instead of I'm trying to help them grow as a person in this situation. I'm trying to help them grow as an employee in this situation. So like us, when we interact with staff, or I'll use my principals at school. One of the things that they were really good at is they would come to you, and their first question is, it rarely, what's wrong in the classroom right now? It was almost always, what's going on in life right now? Like, to find out, individually what's happening in your life right now that may cause some of the issues that you're struggling with right now in your classroom. And that told me that they cared about and they valued me as a human being first, and then as a teacher second. And so, like, I think the way in which we interact with people is a really good indicator. The kind of questions that we ask them, whether or not we actually engage with people. It can be really easy to be dismissive of the people that are in front of us, and so I think those are probably some of the things that I would watch out for in myself if I was not treating people in the way that I know I ought to. I think that's an important sign.
Yeah, it's good. We talked about this idea of the work week and working as kind of viewed through the lens of working to provide those needs. How would you say that we could better evaluate and really determine what our actual daily needs are versus, I'm going to work myself to death to provide this, and this, and really we're working so hard to provide a surplus. You use the example of the manna, which I think was, really good because, that was a unique situation where, God gave them very clear instruction, only take what you need for the day. Right. And on the 1 day a week, you'd say, okay, only take what you need for 2 days. And I think we can learn from that. And, so when we kind of look at that and start looking at our lives, well, I work 7 days a week, so I can provide this for my family, this for my family, this for my family. When maybe part of that is, we're taking the surplus, but maybe the best thing we can do is take a day off and rest and, kind of practice Sabbath.
Yeah, I think Jesus gives us a really clear picture of what our actual everyday needs really are. Matthew 6, he does this. He tells us, in verse 25, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Okay, so he's given us food, something to drink, and clothing. He literally makes that the baseline for this is what you need to live every single day. Food, drink, clothing. That's it. That sounds a lot different than the area that we live in.
Yeah.
Because
country we live in, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah. Let's be really clear about that. I talked a little bit about wealth, just a little bit. Y'all, like every single one of us, in large part, live in the top 5% of the wealthiest people in the world.
Yeah.
Multiple vehicles at our home, a home with multiple rooms, with heating and air conditioning. Most of us have more than one TV in our house. Most of us have multiple cell phones and computers in our house. And all of us have clothing to put on every single day, shoes to wear on our feet, pantries that are full, refrigerators that have things in them. That's not the experience of every person that lives in our area. But for the vast majority of us, that's what we do. And we worry about that stuff so much that it takes away for the rest of our life. We don't actually get to live life because we're so worried about protecting the things that we have and making sure we have enough and providing even a little bit more. And ultimately, Jesus gives us this baseline. And I know that we look at that and we think to ourselves, like, that's not enough. But the creator of the universe tells us you need something to eat, something to drink, something to wear, and you'll be fine. And I think a lot of us would enjoy our lives a lot more if we held the way I think it's Martin Luther puts it. If you held all your stuff with an open hand, not trying to grasp and hold on to it, but just like open-handedly saying, God, if you give me this, I'm going to appreciate it. I'm going to be grateful for it. If you take it away, that's okay too.
Yeah.
To respond as Job responds, shall we take from God the good and not the bad, that sort of thing. Like he gives and he takes away. Yeah. And blessed be the name of the Lord. And ultimately, that's what Jesus is teaching us right here. And this whole passage, of course, is about worry. And it comes right after verse 24, which says, no one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one or love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money or wealth. And so Jesus lays it out for us. It's either this or that. Like you're either going to bow down to the hustle and the exhausting life of having more than enough, or you're going to say, I'm fine. I don't need all that.
Yeah. I
need the bread for the day. And trust that God's going to provide that bread for that day.
Yeah.
P.S. That makes us more generous people.
Yeah.
Because it makes it possible for us to part with our things. We're not grasping onto them, holding onto them, and so concerned about our daily needs. We can see the needs of other people around us and then give generously to help provide for those things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So as we kind of look through this and kind of wrap up this week looking at Sabbath, I think it was interesting, specifically, in the sermon you talked about the instruction on the Sabbath was not for just an individual, but it involved everybody.
It was communal.
Yep. It was very communal, and you had, even like the sojourner, someone who is not part of that community.
Yep.
Still do that, even the livestock and all those types of things. And so with this kind of communal, broad overview inclusion of Sabbath, how can Sabbath really be used, or maybe how is it intended to be used as an outreach tool in our community?
Well, like the entirety of the law in the Pentateuch, those first 5 books of the Bible, the whole point of that law. Jackson and I are still reading Leviticus right now. Man, like there's a lot in there.
Yeah,
there's a lot of rules, a lot of laws, a lot of stuff in there. The point of all that stuff in Leviticus, it happens a lot. God will be instructing Moses, and he will say at the end of a rule or an idea or a commandment or a law, he'll say, I am the Lord. I am the Lord your God. And what it does is it sets that community apart, and people will see that being set apart. And it's not like in an arrogant sort of way.
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about here. It's this, you guys do things differently. We all bust it. We are all tired all the time. We are working our tails off. And here you are, you're basically like, there's a day of your life where you're like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? Why have you said that I don't need that money for that day? I mean, people do it all the time when they talk about Chick-fil-A. Man, I'm telling you right now, if our Chick-fil-A in Madison opened on Sundays, that place would be packed.
Mm-hmm.
But they have decided that they're going to forego a day's worth of income.
Yeah, that's a good amount of income.
Trust me, I've seen that drive-through.
You're giving up probably, depending on the location, I would say now the Madison location probably $15,000 or $16,000 a day. So $16,000 times 52 is how much that they're giving up.
I'm not doing that math, but it's a lot of money.
Yep.
It's close to $500,000, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I may have done math really poorly just then. I don't know.
It sounded good.
It's a lot of money.
You are a former English teacher.
Yes. That's a lot of money, though.
Mm-hmm.
But they've said it is better for us and our employees to take a day and say, I don't have to go to work today.
Yeah.
I don't have to try to survive today. And I can guarantee you today it hasn't hurt them in the long run.
Yep.
And it has also set them apart from everybody else. Everybody else is like, how can they do that? And you got McDonald's out there 7 days a week. You got Cane's. You got, I mean, like all these other restaurants. And again, this is not judgment. This is simply like what it does as far as outreach is it just sets you apart. You look different than the rest of the world. You're able to say no to all these things. And what that also does is it allows you to say yes to certain things. So I can invite my neighbor into my home because I'm not busting it one day,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to get somewhere, or my schedule's not so full that I can't speak to my neighbor, and all of a sudden I'm inviting my neighbor into my home to spend some time with them, or I can stop and talk to my children about life and find out what's going on with them and be more intentional about those sorts of things. It makes a difference in so many different ways. And I think there's incredible freedom in that, and we don't realize that. I think we see it as a type of slavery, when in reality it is liberation from the things that enslave us.
Yeah, that's good. And as we kind of think through this, my life group that met this week, we kind of were talking about this and got onto the idea that God was always an outreach God. You look at the Old Testament, several laws were put in place specifically for the outsider, providing a pathway for them to become an insider. And of course, Isaiah writes and says, you are to be a light to the nations. And it's this idea of always, like, all these different laws and things that God put in place, and creates that opportunity to be a platform to point people to the God that we serve. And like you said, if we are willing to say, I can take a break today, I can rest today, because I know the God I have served has provided me that opportunity. And of course, when you get into the spiritual aspect of it, and I won't say a whole lot on that, because like I said, I think you'll go there in just a couple of weeks, but this idea of spiritual rest that has now been provided in Jesus, that's the only place that I can experience that spiritual rest, but it allows us to do that.
Might preach.
So, I think that's the important kind of idea of Sabbath, as we can kind of keep walking through this, is it does, everything in God's word is there so that we can reach the world. And we've got to look at everything as the opportunity to do that, as we are stewards of his word. So, as always, Michael, glad you were here, part of this. Those of you who are listening, watching, if you have any questions, never hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to have further conversations with you, whether it be in person, through email, phone calls, whatever works best for you. We'll be happy to continue this conversation further. But as always, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.